Welcome, my dear listeners, to Learn English with Sara. Today we begin a powerful journey, one that blends story language and life lessons into an experience that will help you grow not only in English, but also in confidence. This is the story of how one ordinary person transformed their life by rebuilding confidence from the inside out. It is a story of struggle, fear, courage, and rebirth, a story that may remind you of your own silent battles. I invite you to listen closely, feel deeply, and allow every part of this journey to strengthen your English and expand your mindset. Now let us begin. There was once a young man named Evan, someone who looked perfectly normal from the outside. To others, he seemed quiet, polite, perhaps a little shy, but harmless. But inside, Evan carried a heaviness that he couldn't explain. Every morning at 6:30 a.m., when his alarm rang, he woke with the same dull feeling in his chest, a sense that he was living smaller than he was meant to. He went through the motions of life, brushing his teeth, putting on plain clothes, walking to work, answering messages, pretending everything was fine. But inside, he felt invisible, not because others ignored him, but because he had slowly begun to ignore himself. For years, he believed confidence was something other people were born with, and he wasn't. He thought maybe it came from beauty, money, luck, or praise, but none of those things ever seemed to find him. What he didn't know was that real confidence, lasting confidence, doesn't fall from the sky. It is something we build step by step, habit by habit, breath by breath. The turning point arrived on a cloudy Thursday afternoon. Evan had been asked to speak briefly in a meeting. Only 2 minutes, nothing complicated. But when the moment came, his throat tightened, his palms trembled, and a familiar thought echoed inside him. I'm not good enough. I'll make a mistake. Everyone will judge me. He looked down, avoided eye contact, and quietly said someone else should speak. People nodded politely. The meeting continued, but Evan could feel something inside him crack, not loudly, not painfully, but deeply. That evening, as he walked home at 7:45 p.m., the streets were quiet and the cool air touched his face. For the first time, he admitted to himself that he wasn't just scared of speaking. He was scared of living. He had been hiding from opportunities, avoiding challenges, shrinking himself in every situation. And this realization hurt him more than any mistake could. He reached his small apartment, sat on the edge of his bed, and whispered softly, "Why am I like this?" And in the silence that followed, he remembered something his late grandfather once told him. Confidence doesn't come before action. It comes after. Those words, once forgotten, suddenly felt alive. That night became the beginning of a new chapter. Evan decided to run a small experiment with himself, not to change overnight, not to become fearless instantly, but simply to take action. The next morning at 6:30 a.m., instead of lying in bed for 10 minutes the way he always did, he stood up immediately. It was a tiny action, almost meaningless. But as he moved, he felt something shift inside him, a small spark, a whisper of possibility. He asked himself one simple question: what is one small thing I can do today that I avoided yesterday? After a moment of thought, he chose to speak one sentence in English out loud, something he had always been nervous to do, even alone. The sentence was simple: I am capable of more than I believe. His voice trembled at first, but he said it anyway. He said it again, and with each repetition, he felt less like a stranger to himself. That single sentence became his first act of courage. Later that day at work, he pushed himself to speak up once during a conversation. Just a small comment, nothing dramatic. But when he did it, he felt a little stronger, a little prouder, as if a new version of himself was waking up. It wasn't perfect or smooth, but it was real. And that was enough. That evening, he tried something new. He asked himself 5 things he liked about himself. It felt awkward, almost silly. But slowly, he found answers. I care about people. I survived many failures. I am learning. I don't give up easily. I have a good heart. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like his own enemy. He didn't know it yet, but he had just taken the first steps toward a life he never believed he could live. Over the next several days, Evan continued his quiet experiment with himself, though he told no one about it. Each morning, he greeted the day at 6:30 a.m. with a small action, never something dramatic, never something that required him to be a new person. Instead, he focused on tiny acts that whispered, I am trying. He didn't realize it yet, but these small actions were building new memories, new muscle, new identity. Confidence was beginning to grow quietly like a seed breaking through the soil in the dark. One morning, he woke up and said his 5 things out loud again. This time, the words felt more honest. I am improving, he whispered. I am becoming more courageous. He had spent years repeating negative sentences to himself, sentences that slowly poisoned his belief. But these new words, simple, gentle reminders, were slowly cleaning the air inside his mind. Every repetition made him feel a little more like someone worth listening to, even by himself. Around this time, Evan decided to face something he had always avoided: meeting people who were ahead of him. In the past, he stayed away from anyone confident, successful, well-spoken, or charismatic because their strength made him feel weaker. But now he understood something important. His discomfort wasn't a warning. It was an invitation to grow. So one afternoon at 4:15 p.m., he walked into a small community center where a weekly English conversation group gathered. His legs felt heavy, his heart was unsteady, and fear pressed on his chest like a weight. But he walked through the door anyway. Inside, he saw people chatting, laughing, practicing sentences he struggled with. For a moment, he wanted to run away, but he stayed. He watched how they spoke, clear, confident, relaxed. He listened to how they thought and expressed themselves. And slowly, he felt something: unexpected inspiration instead of insecurity. When it was his turn to speak, his voice trembled, but he managed a simple introduction. The group welcomed him warmly, not judging him for his mistakes or his shaking voice. He left the center that evening with a small but powerful realization: people ahead of him were not threats. They were guides. Another habit began shaping his life, starting small, starting today. Evan realized he had spent years waiting for perfect moments. He told himself he would speak English when he felt ready, exercise when he had more time, express his ideas when he felt confident, chase his dreams when he felt prepared. And because he never felt ready, he never acted. But now he no longer waited. If he wanted to improve his English, he practiced one sentence. If he wanted to be healthier, he took a 10-minute walk. If he wanted to try something new, he allowed himself to be a beginner. The size of the action no longer mattered, only the direction. And with every small step, momentum grew. Some days were easier, some days were difficult, but every day he moved, even if only a little. He learned that confidence was not a sudden explosion of bravery. It was a slow rise built from countless small decisions. One evening, he sat at his desk and looked at a long list of goals he had written months ago: become fluent, build a side income, speak confidently in front of others, change careers, travel alone. The list had once overwhelmed him so much that he gave up before trying, But now he approached it differently. Instead of staring at the mountain, he broke it into silent, simple steps. Speak one sentence, watch one English video, and shadow it. Save a small amount of money weekly. Research one new skill. Once broken into small pieces, the goals no longer felt impossible. They felt clear. He discovered a truth many people never learn. Overwhelm kills more dreams than failure ever will. As Evan continued building these habits, something in his appearance also began to shift, not just on the outside, but on the inside. He dressed a little better, even on days when no one would see him. He took 10 minutes each morning to groom himself, not to impress anyone, but to remind his mind, I matter enough to care for myself. He cleaned his room and felt how a clear environment brought a clear mind. He sat quietly for a few minutes each night, letting his thoughts settle instead of drowning in noise. These small acts made him feel more grounded, more present, more in control. And slowly people began noticing something different about him. They couldn't explain it, but they sensed a quiet strength growing inside him. His posture was straighter, his voice steadier, his steps firmer. He was becoming someone who carried himself with respect, even if the world didn't fully see it yet. But the most powerful shift was happening internally. Evan learned that emotion followed motion. On days when he felt insecure, he stood tall anyway. On days when he felt scared, he walked with intention. On days when he felt small, he spoke with a little more volume. And each time he changed his body, his mind followed. He was learning something life-changing. He didn't need to feel confident to act. He needed to act to feel confident. Weeks passed, and Evan began noticing a new pattern inside himself, one he had never experienced before. Whenever fear appeared, he no longer froze. He no longer stepped backward. Instead, he stepped forward even if his hands shook or his heart raced. He had learned the habit of doing things scared, not recklessly, not perfectly, but bravely. And it was changing him from the inside out. One particularly important moment happened on a rainy Saturday afternoon around 3:20 p.m. Evan had been invited to join a small group presentation at the community center. Nothing official, nothing large. Just a chance to speak for 2 minutes about a topic of his choice. He almost declined. His mind whispered the old messages, "You're not ready. People will judge you. You'll look foolish." But he had made a promise to himself that he no longer avoided situations that made him grow. So he accepted. When his turn came, he stood up feeling every muscle tighten. His voice shook on the first sentence, steadied on the second, then grew clearer by the third. He wasn't charismatic or flawless, but he was present. He didn't run away. When he finished, people smiled, nodded, and even complimented him. He walked home in the rain feeling something warm rise in his chest, pride. Not because he performed perfectly, but because he honored the courage he wished for. He was learning to walk with fear instead of hiding from it. Around this time, Evan realized something deeper about his life. Confidence was connected to freedom, and freedom depended heavily on financial independence. He wasn't poor, but he had always been dependent, afraid to say no, afraid to leave unhealthy situations, afraid to dream bigger, because he didn't believe he had the resources to support himself. His money habits were weak, emotional, and unplanned. He often felt trapped, not because he lacked ability, but because he lacked control. So he made a new commitment. He studied money for 10 minutes each morning. He tracked every expense. He avoided impulse purchases. He saved a small amount weekly. He spent consciously instead of emotionally. Slowly, his financial life, once chaotic and cloudy, began to feel organized and empowering. He didn't become rich overnight, but he became responsible someone who could stand independently. For the first time, he felt the quiet power of financial freedom growing inside him, not as numbers on a screen, but as confidence in his spine. To support his mindset, he built another habit, a morning playlist. Every day at 6:45 a.m., while brushing his teeth or preparing breakfast, he played motivational speeches music that lifted his spirit and voice notes he recorded of himself saying things like, "You are improving, you are brave, you are growing, keep going." At first, it felt strange to hear his own voice, but soon he began trusting it. His playlist became armor, a shield against old insecurities, a reminder of the new identity he was building. Through these changes, Evan also learned a painful truth about life. Confidence cannot grow in toxic environments. He noticed that certain people around him constantly drained his energy, people who mocked his efforts, doubted his decisions, laughed when he tried something new, or filled every space with negativity. For years, he tolerated these people because he was afraid to stand alone. But now he understood that protecting his peace was not selfish, it was necessary. So he quietly created distance. He stopped sharing his dreams with those who didn't believe in him. He reduced conversations with people who gossiped or criticized constantly. He spent more time around those who encouraged growth, whether in person or through books, videos, and online communities. His world became smaller, but clearer, lighter, healthier. He felt his inner voice become louder and more confident, no longer drowned out by noise that didn't belong to him. Still, even with all this growth, Evan learned one of the most important lessons of his journey: persistence matters more than motivation. Some mornings, he woke up energized, ready to take on the world. Other mornings, he felt heavy, slow, uncertain, but he showed up anyway. He practiced his sentences. He asked himself his 5 qualities. He did his small actions. He listened to his playlist. He protected his energy. Even on bad days, he kept moving forward, sometimes a little, sometimes a lot, but always forward. He began to see himself as someone who doesn't quit, someone reliable, someone strong. And in the middle of all this progress came a moment that tested everything he had learned. One afternoon at 5:10 p.m., he received a message from his manager asking him to lead a short presentation the next week. This wasn't like the small conversations at the community center. This was professional, serious. He felt an old fear rising like a wave ready to drown him. His first instinct was to decline with an excuse, but he caught himself. He remembered his vow: "I no longer run away from situations, I run toward them." So he replied, "Yes, I can do it." The moment he hit send, he felt both terrified and alive. This was not just a work task, it was a doorway. The week leading up to the presentation felt longer than any week Evan had lived before. Every night as the clock moved past 10:20 p.m., he felt the familiar fear crawling into his chest, whispering doubts about his abilities. But instead of surrendering the way he once did, he used each moment as practice. Not perfect, polished practice, just simple, honest preparation. He stood in front of his small mirror shoulders, trembling voice uneven, and repeated his opening lines. Sometimes he stumbled. Sometimes he forgot what he meant to say. But each time he spoke, even when flawed, he gathered proof that he could show up. And proof he had learned was the true source of confidence. By Wednesday evening, something shifted inside him. He no longer felt like he was preparing only for a presentation. He felt like he was preparing to meet a new version of himself, one he had been building quietly through tiny habits, brave choices, and countless moments where he decided not to run. In those nights of practice, he wasn't fighting fear. He was walking with it. When Thursday finally arrived, the air felt heavy. At 8:50 a.m., he walked into the meeting room. His hands were slightly cold, his heart beat louder than usual, but his posture tall. He remembered the rule he had learned: emotion follows motion. So he stood confidently, even if he didn't fully feel it yet. And slowly, the confidence began to rise to match the posture. When his manager called his name, he stepped forward. The room was silent. His voice cracked on the first sentence, but he didn't stop. On the second sentence, he steadied himself. On the third, he breathed more deeply. And by the fourth, he felt present, authentic, imperfect, and undeniably brave. He didn't try to impress anyone. He didn't try to prove anything. He simply shared what he had prepared. When he finished, there was no dramatic applause, no celebration. Just a nod of approval from his manager and a warm smile from a colleague. But that was enough. More than enough. Because the real applause was happening inside him. When he returned to his desk, he felt a wave of emotion, relief, pride, and a deep sense of respect for himself. He had done it scared, and because of that fear had lost a little more power over him. Later that evening, as he walked home at 6:40 p.m., he realized that confidence wasn't a sudden transformation. It was built through habits, 15 habits he had slowly woven into his life, each one strengthening the next. But there was one more habit he needed to embrace, a final piece that would carry him through every challenge ahead, running toward the situation instead of running away. For years, avoidance had been his silent enemy. He avoided conversations, avoided risks, avoided dreams that felt too big. But now he understood that avoidance was like fertilizer. It made fear grow stronger in the dark. Facing things, even when uncomfortable, made fear smaller. So he made a vow that night as the streetlights glowed above him. I will face what I fear. I will move toward the things that challenge me. I will not shrink anymore. Over the following days, Evan put this vow into practice. When a colleague invited him to join a discussion he normally would avoid, he said yes. When someone asked his opinion, he spoke honestly instead of hiding behind polite silence. When an opportunity came to collaborate on a new project, he volunteered even though he felt unready. Each action felt like stepping into cold water, uncomfortable at first, then refreshing, then empowering. He also began making choices that supported his future rather than his fears. He stopped using excuses like, I'm not ready, maybe later, or what if I fail. Instead, he asked himself, what small step can I take today? And the answer was always clear, always simple, always doable. Step by step, he grew stronger. People around him started noticing the change, not because he was suddenly louder or more charismatic, but because he carried himself differently. There was a quiet energy in him, a grounded presence. He no longer chased approval. He no longer shrank in discomfort. He no longer apologized for existing. He simply lived with intention. One day, his friend Mia pulled him aside and said, You seem different lately. More alive, more you. Evan smiled, not proudly, but gratefully. Because he knew she wasn't seeing a new version of him. She was seeing the version of himself he had buried for years. And yet a deeper transformation was still unfolding within him. He was beginning to realize that confidence wasn't just about speaking, standing tall, or taking action. It was about becoming someone he respected, someone he trusted. someone he no longer abandoned. And the most beautiful part, he was only at the beginning. As the months unfolded, Evan's transformation continued quietly but powerfully. It wasn't the kind of change that happens in a single moment or from a single achievement. It was the kind that grows slowly like dawn, spreading across the sky, soft at first, then undeniable. Every day he practiced the habits that rebuilt him, and every day those habits shaped a stronger, calmer, more confident version of the man he had once been afraid to become. But confidence, he learned, wasn't only about rising, it was also about protecting what he had built. One morning, while sitting alone at a small cafe around 9:10 a.m., he opened his notebook and wrote down a sentence he had come to understand deeply. My energy is valuable. He had spent much of his life giving his energy away, absorbing other people's negativity, letting their criticism shape his decisions, shrinking himself to avoid conflict. But now he recognized how draining negative environments could be, and he realized he had the power to choose what influences he allowed into his life. This awareness began shaping his relationships. He noticed how some people around him always spoke of problems, but never solutions, how they mocked ambition, how they viewed effort as foolish. He didn't judge them, but he no longer let them define him. He minimized contact with those who drained his spirit and gave more time to those who inspired growth, even if those people were found through books, videos, or strangers trying their best just like him. Protecting his energy became an act of respect toward himself. One afternoon around 3:45 p.m., something unexpected happened at work. A new employee named Daniel joined the team, confident, articulate, socially smooth. The kind of person Evan once avoided, fearing comparison. But now, instead of shrinking, Evan felt curious. He watched how Daniel communicated, how he handled stress, how he listened before speaking. Instead of comparing himself, he learned. Instead of feeling threatened, he felt motivated. He realized that standing near confidence allowed him to absorb it. One day, while they were working on a project, Daniel said, "You're calm under pressure." I like that. It was a short sentence, but it struck Evan deeply. Not because of the compliment itself, but because it reflected something Evan had spent months building: inner steadiness. For the first time, he saw that people were beginning to sense the strength he had cultivated silently. Yet the most significant test of his growth came not from work but from within. One evening around 7:30 p.m., Evan received an invitation to speak at the community center again, this time not as a participant, but as someone who could share his journey with new learners. The idea terrified him. He felt a wave of insecurity rise, whispering, "Who am I to speak? I'm not perfect. I'm not confident enough. I'm not ready." But then he recognized that voice, the old voice, the voice that once controlled him. Now he knew what to do with it. He didn't try to silence it. He didn't argue with it. He simply walked forward with it. The night of the event, the room filled slowly. People chatted, notebooks in hand, waiting for guidance, waiting for inspiration. Evan stood near the back, holding his notes, breathing deeply. When the organizer called his name, he walked to the front with steady steps. At first, he hesitated, not from fear, but from emotion. He saw the eyes of people who reminded him of his past self, shy, uncertain, hopeful, and a warm courage rose inside him. He spoke not as a teacher, not as an expert, but as someone who understood them. He shared the habits that had rebuilt his life. He spoke of taking action even when his hands shook, of speaking one sentence a day, of whispering 5 things he liked about himself every morning. He talked about breaking big goals into small steps, about protecting his peace, about choosing to do things scared instead of not doing them at all. He didn't give them perfection, he gave them honesty. When he finished, the room stayed quiet for a moment, absorbing, reflecting. Then the applause came, not loud, but heartfelt. Several people approached him afterward, thanking him for sharing. One woman said, "I thought I was the only one who felt this way." Another said, "You gave me hope." And Evan realized then that confidence is never just for ourselves. It ripples, it spreads, it lifts others. On his walk home under the evening lights, he felt something he had never felt so clearly: alignment. He no longer felt like a man living in the shadows of his potential. He no longer avoided the world or his dreams. He was becoming someone who moved with purpose, someone who trusted himself, someone who could stand tall even on uncertain ground. Most importantly, he understood that confidence wasn't about never feeling fear again. It was about never letting fear decide the direction of his life. And for the first time, the future didn't scare him. It excited him. In the weeks that followed his talk at the community center, something subtle yet profound continued to evolve within Evan. Confidence was no longer a theory he chased or a quality he lacked. It had become a companion, a quiet strength that shaped the way he walked through the world. It didn't erase every fear, nor did it remove every doubt, but it gave him the courage to move forward with them instead of running away. One morning at 6:30 a.m., he woke up and felt a peaceful stillness he hadn't experienced in years. It wasn't excitement, it wasn't motivation, it was something deeper: self-respect. He stood in front of his mirror, looked into his own eyes, and no longer saw the fragile, doubtful version of himself he once carried like a burden. He saw someone who had earned his confidence through choices, actions, and habits. Someone who had rebuilt himself piece by piece. He prepared his breakfast, listening to his daily playlist. Words that once felt distant now felt familiar, even comforting. As he sipped his tea, he reflected on how far he had come. Months ago, he could barely speak in a group. Now he was preparing for something he never imagined possible: hosting a weekly session at the community center to help others find their voice. The director had invited him to lead it, saying his story made him relatable and inspiring. Evan accepted, not because he felt perfect, but because he felt ready to grow again. The first session took place on a sunny Saturday morning at 10:00 a.m. A small group of learners gathered, each carrying their own fears: fear of judgment, fear of making mistakes, fear of being seen. Evan recognized that fear instantly. It was the same fear he had lived with for years, and that recognition made him gentle, understanding, and patient. He began not by teaching English, but by teaching courage in simple forms: speaking one sentence, making eye contact, celebrating small victories. He watched as people who once spoke softly began sharing more boldly. He saw shy faces slowly brighten with pride. He heard laughter where there had once been silence. And he realized that building confidence wasn't only a personal journey, it was a gift, one we pass on simply by showing others what is possible. One day after a session, a young student approached him. Her name was Lila, and her voice was barely louder than a whisper when she said, "I want to speak like you someday." Confident, calm, not scared. Her eyes held that familiar mixture of fear and hope. Evan smiled gently and answered, "You don't have to wait to stop being scared. Speak scared. That's how confidence begins." As he walked home later that afternoon, her words stayed with him. He remembered how many times he had waited for confidence to appear before trying anything new, how many opportunities he had missed because he let fear lead. But those days felt distant now. He had learned that courage wasn't loud or dramatic. It was the quiet decision to take one small step again and again, no matter how afraid he felt. And in those reflections, he discovered something deeper. Confidence was not the absence of imperfection. It was acceptance, acceptance of flaws, acceptance of effort, acceptance of growth. True confidence didn't make him invincible, it made him honest. It allowed him to face life with an open heart instead of a closed one. That evening, he sat by his window as the city lights shimmered in the distance. He thought about his journey from a man who avoided life to a man who walked toward it. He realized that everyone at some point carries invisible battles. Everyone feels doubt. Everyone feels fear. But not everyone chooses to rise above them. He whispered to himself with gratitude, "I'm proud of who I'm becoming." Years from now, he might forget the exact dates, the specific steps, the small victories. But he would never forget the lesson that changed his life forever. Confidence is not given. It is built. It is earned. It is lived one brave breath at a time. And as long as someone out there feels small, scared, or uncertain, his story will remain a reminder that transformation begins the moment we choose not to hide. Thank you for listening to this story on Learn English with Sara. If this journey inspired you, motivated you, or helped you grow, make sure to like the video, share it with someone who needs encouragement, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment about your favorite moment or lesson. Your support truly helps this community grow.